What if I told you that the difference between being stuck and being unstoppable lies in one small action? Not in money, not in talent, not in luck, but in something you already have and maybe you've been ignoring it your whole life. I call it soaking it. Yes, soaking it. Let me explain. I used to believe success was about doing more, hustling harder, chasing every opportunity like a wild animal chasing prey. But I was wrong, completely wrong, because you can chase and chase, but if your mind, your spirit, and your heart are dry, nothing grows. Think of a sponge. A dry sponge touches water, and it drinks it, it soaks it, it expands, it becomes alive. That's exactly what I did. I soaked wisdom, I soaked pain, I soaked rejection, I soaked lessons, and slowly I expanded into someone I never imagined I could be. Do you know the biggest mistake people make? They hear, they nod, they agree, but they don't soak. They let wisdom pass over them like rain on glass. It never gets in. I decided differently. When life threw rejection at me, instead of saying, "Why me?" I asked, "What's it teaching me?" I soaked it. When I lost everything and had to start again, instead of drowning in shame, I said, "This is fuel." I soaked it. When people doubted me, when they laughed at my dreams, when I felt alone, I didn't resist it. I let it sink in. I soaked their doubt until it became my drive. And here's the secret: when you soak, you don't just survive, you multiply. Imagine soil after rain, dry, cracked, lifeless. Then rain comes, it drinks, it soaks. And suddenly, green shoots break through. Life everywhere. That was me. And that can be you. But let me ask you this: what are you soaking right now? Are you soaking fear? Are you soaking negativity from the people around you? Are you soaking the excuses you tell yourself every day? Because here's the truth. Whatever you soak, you become. I chose to soak vision. I chose to soak courage. I chose to soak discipline. And slowly, but surely, I became ultra-rich, not just in money. Though yes, money came, opportunities flowed, doors opened. But the real richness was in freedom. Freedom to wake up and love what I do. Freedom to give, to inspire, to make a difference. That's the richness no bank can measure. So, if you're tired of feeling stuck, here's my challenge: stop chasing blindly. Start soaking intentionally. Soak the books that stretch your mind. Soak the people who lift you higher. Soak the failures that teach you resilience. Soak the moments of silence where your soul whispers the truth. Because one day, you'll look back and realize, it wasn't luck, it wasn't magic, it wasn't a miracle. It was the soaking. And that's when you'll say with confidence, I soaked it, and I became ultra-rich. So my friends, soak wisely, soak deeply, and soak until your life overflows. Because this isn't just about success, it's about becoming someone extraordinary. And remember this: the world doesn't belong to those who chase the fastest, it belongs to those who soak the deepest. Success isn't about doing more, it's about absorbing more, soaking wisdom, lessons, and opportunities. Like a sponge, you expand only when you soak experiences instead of resisting them. Pain, rejection, and failure are not setbacks but lessons to be soaked and transformed into power. What you soak, fear or courage, excuses or vision, determines who you become. True richness is not just money, but freedom, purpose, and the ability to give and inspire. Stop chasing blindly. Start soaking intentionally. That's the secret to becoming ultra-rich. Success isn't about doing more, it's about absorbing more. That's what I meant when I said soaking wisdom, lessons, and opportunities is the hidden difference between the people who stay stuck and the people who break through. Most of us live our lives in constant motion, chasing, pushing, running from one task to another. We confuse being busy with being productive, we confuse movement with progress. And yet, deep inside, many people feel like hamsters on a wheel, running endlessly but never arriving anywhere. The reason is simple: they're not absorbing anything. They're moving through life like water running over stone, never soaking in, never leaving an imprint, never changing at the core. I remember once sitting in a seminar, listening to a man who had lost everything: his business, his family, his reputation. He stood there with the kind of calm that only comes from surviving a storm, and he said, "Don't just hear my story, soak it. Don't clap politely and forget me when you leave this room. Let it enter you, let it change you, let it become a mirror for your own life." That line never left me. Because I realized I had been guilty of hearing without absorbing. How many times had I read a book, underlined powerful quotes, and then gone back to the same habits. How many times had I listened to a mentor's advice, nodded in agreement, but never let it alter my actions? I was sipping from a cup when I should have been soaking in a river. Think of a child. When children learn, they soak everything. They repeat words they hear once, they mimic gestures they see. They absorb entire languages without studying grammar rules. They are sponges, open, alive, hungry for everything around them. And then something happens as we grow older. We stop soaking. We listen selectively, we dismiss too quickly. We live with filters that block wisdom before it ever reaches us. The tragedy is not lack of knowledge in the world. The tragedy is our refusal to absorb what is already here. Let me tell you about a friend of mine. He was in sales, struggling to meet his targets. Every day he came back frustrated, blaming the market, the customers, the competition. One day he attended a workshop where a veteran salesman said, "If you want to succeed, stop selling products. Start selling solutions." It was simple advice, nothing new. But my friend, he didn't soak it. He heard it, said, "Yeah, I know that," and went back to his old ways. 6 months later, he quit his job. Contrast that with another man in the same workshop. He soaked those words deeply. He asked himself, "How do I turn this principle into action? How can I sell solutions, not products?" He rewrote his pitch, changed his conversations with clients, started listening instead of pushing. Within 1 year, he became one of the top performers in his company. Same advice, same words. One man heard, another man soaked. The difference was destiny. Absorbing wisdom means allowing it to marinate in your soul until it transforms you. It's like pouring water into dry soil. At first, it just sits on the surface. But if you let it, it seeps deeper and deeper, nourishing roots you didn't even know were there. That's why I say doing more is not the secret. Many people do more, yet get nowhere. But the ones who absorb more, who take one lesson and squeeze every drop out of it, those are the ones who rise. There's a story about Bruce Lee that I love. He said, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." Do you see it? That's soaking. Most people skim through life, collecting thousands of quotes, thousands of videos, thousands of podcasts. But nothing sticks. The powerful ones, they may hold on to just one truth, one principle, one insight. But they soak it so deeply that it reshapes their entire being. Think about the people you admire, the leaders, the innovators, the giants of history. They weren't people who just did more. They were people who absorbed differently. Einstein soaked curiosity. Martin Luther King Jr. soaked justice. Steve Jobs soaked simplicity. They weren't drowning in 1,000 ideas. They were saturated in one. That saturation gave them power, gave them clarity, gave them the strength to push through when others quit. Absorbing is also about humility. Because to soak, you have to admit that you don't know it all. You have to let go of pride and allow yourself to be taught by life, by pain, by people you might otherwise dismiss. I once met a man who had built an empire in business, and I asked him, "What's your secret?" He smiled and said, "Every person I meet, I assume they know something I don't, and I soak it." Imagine living like that. Every conversation becomes a treasure hunt. Every encounter becomes a chance to grow richer. Not in money, but in perspective. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Too many of us block wisdom because it doesn't come packaged the way we expect. A janitor could drop a sentence that could change your future. But if you're too busy looking for advice in boardrooms, you miss it. A child could say something that carries the wisdom of the ages. But if you dismiss them as just a kid, you miss it. Life whispers its secrets through ordinary moments. Only those who soak catch them. So when I say success isn't about doing more, I mean stop wearing yourself out in frantic activity that leads nowhere. Learn to pause, to breathe, to absorb. If you read one book, let it transform you. If you hear one story, let it shape you. If you encounter one struggle, let it teach you. That's how you grow, not by multiplying noise, but by deepening absorption. And let me leave you with an image. Picture two people standing in a rainstorm. One wears a raincoat, shielding themselves from every drop. The other opens their arms, lets the water drench them, feels it on their skin, soaks it into their clothes. Who do you think leaves the storm changed? Life rains lessons on all of us every single day, but only the ones who soak, who dare to let it in, come out transformed. A sponge. That's the image that changed everything for me. You've held one before, haven't you? When it's dry, it looks small, brittle, lifeless. But the moment it touches water, something incredible happens. It drinks it all in, expands, and becomes soft, flexible, alive. That's what happens to us when we soak experiences instead of resisting them. Most people go through life like dry sponges. They brush against wisdom, pain, rejection, even opportunities, but nothing stays. They remain unchanged, hard and brittle. And then they wonder why life keeps breaking them. But the ones who soak, who allow every drop of experience to enter them, they expand into people the world cannot ignore. I remember a time when I was struggling in silence. I was drowning in failure, barely making ends meet, and I kept asking, why me? Why now? My heart was dry soil, cracked and empty, and life kept pouring down storms. At first, I resisted them. I covered myself, tried to shield myself from the lessons hidden inside the struggle. But then I realized, storms were never meant to destroy me. They were meant to soak me, to expand me, to prepare me for something greater. That's when I stopped resisting and started absorbing. And just like a sponge in water, I began to grow. Think about this: a sponge can only expand by contact. It has to touch the water, it has to surrender to it, and so do we. That's why people who avoid pain, who avoid risk, who avoid failure, remain the same size their whole lives. They never soak, they never grow. But when you dare to let life in, when you allow its waters to seep through you, you change, you transform, you stretch into someone you never imagined you could be. I once read a quote that struck me deeply. Every wound leaves a lesson, but only if you let it enter. How many people walk around wounded but never wiser? They suffer, but they don't soak. They repeat the same mistakes, the same heartbreaks, the same disappointments, because they never allow themselves to absorb the wisdom hidden inside their pain. But the ones who choose to soak even the hardest moments, those are the ones who rise. Take Thomas Edison, for example. History tells us he failed more than 1,000 times before finally creating the light bulb. 1,000 times! Most people would have quit after 10, but Edison soaked every failure. He famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10 zillion ways that won't work." Do you see it? That's soaking. He let each failure expand him, stretch his creativity, push his limits. And eventually, he lit up the world. Now contrast that with someone who refuses to soak. Imagine a person who applies for one job, gets rejected, and decides never to try again. They let rejection harden them instead of expanding them. They shrink when they should grow. That's the tragedy of a dry sponge. It breaks under pressure. But a soaked sponge, it bends, it flexes, it survives. Absorbing experiences is also about finding meaning in the little things. I once saw a young boy watching an old man polish shoes on the street. The boy asked, "Why do you shine them so carefully?" The old man smiled and said, "Because I want the person who wears them to feel proud when they walk." That was such a simple moment, but I soaked it. It taught me that dignity doesn't come from what you do. It comes from how you do it. That small encounter expanded my view of work, respect, and purpose. If I hadn't soaked it, I would have missed the treasure hidden in that moment. You see, life is constantly whispering to us, sometimes in loud storms of failure, sometimes in quiet drops of wisdom from unexpected places. But if you're too busy rushing, too distracted, too hardened by pride or fear, you won't soak it. And without soaking, you stay the same. Imagine soil in the desert, cracked, dry, lifeless. Rain falls, but the soil is too hard, so the water runs off. Nothing grows. Then imagine soil that is open, ready, soft. The rain falls, it drinks, it soaks, and soon green shoots break through. That's the difference between those who resist and those who absorb. And let me be honest, it's not easy to soak pain. It's not easy to soak rejection, betrayal, or loss. Our instinct is to fight it, to numb it, to run from it. But what if, instead of running, you allowed yourself to say, "This hurts, but it's teaching me something"? What if you believed every hardship was a lesson wrapped in disguise? What if you soaked instead of resisted? I promise you, you would expand in ways you can't imagine. A woman I once knew went through a devastating divorce. She felt broken, worthless, convinced her life was over. For months she resisted, refused to accept, refused to learn. But eventually, she began to soak her pain. She asked, "What can I learn about myself from this? How can I grow stronger, wiser, more compassionate?" She let the tears become her water, and slowly, she expanded. She built a career, found her confidence, raised her children with strength. And years later she said, "That pain was my greatest teacher. It expanded me into the woman I was meant to be." That's the power of soaking. Even in success, you must soak. Because success without soaking turns into arrogance. I once saw a businessman who made millions but learned nothing. He bragged, flaunted, and ignored the lessons life tried to teach him. Eventually, he lost it all, and he had nothing left because he had never absorbed the wisdom hidden in his journey. Compare that to another man I met. Also successful, but humble. He said, "Every deal I close, I ask myself, what did I learn? What did this teach me about people, about patience, about trust?" He was rich, yes, but more importantly, he was rich in wisdom. And that richness could never be taken away. So, when I say soak pain, soak wisdom, soak rejection, soak lessons, I don't mean suffer blindly. I mean let life shape you, let it expand you, let it enter you so deeply that you cannot remain the same. Because the truth is, you were not meant to stay small. You were meant to expand, to stretch, to grow beyond the limits you thought defined you. And that only happens when you soak. Just like a sponge becomes alive the moment it drinks water, you become alive the moment you absorb experiences fully. That's the secret most people never discover. Not running faster, not doing more, but soaking deeper. Because life is not about how many storms you survive. It's about how much you absorb from each one. And the more you soak, the bigger you become, until one day you look in the mirror and realize, you are no longer the dry, brittle person you once were. You are expanded, alive, and unbreakable. When life threw rejection at me, instead of saying, "Why me?" I asked, "What's it teaching me?" I soaked it. That was one of the hardest shifts I ever made, because rejection has a sting that cuts deep into your heart. It makes you question your worth, your dreams, even your very existence. But what if I told you rejection is not a closed door, it's a mirror? It shows you something about yourself you would have never seen otherwise. And if you soak it, it can become the very thing that propels you into greatness. I remember vividly the first time I truly felt the weight of rejection. I had applied for a position I believed was made for me. I had prepared for weeks, polished my answers, rehearsed in front of the mirror, convinced myself that this was my breakthrough. When the call finally came, the words were sharp. "We're sorry, but we've decided to go with someone else." I dropped the phone, and it felt as though the ground had collapsed beneath me. For days I replayed every detail. What did I say wrong? What did I lack? Why was I not good enough? But in the silence of my disappointment, I began to hear a whisper I had ignored before. The rejection was not saying, "You are worthless." It was saying, "You are being redirected." That was my first lesson in soaking rejection. Think about it. Some of the greatest people in history were built by rejection. J.K. Rowling was rejected by more than a dozen publishers before someone finally took a chance on Harry Potter. Today, that story has touched millions. Walt Disney was told he lacked imagination. Oprah Winfrey was fired because she was unfit for television. Imagine if they had let rejection harden them, instead of soaking it. Imagine if they had stopped at the first no. They would have never become who they were meant to be. What made them extraordinary was not the rejection itself, but the way they absorbed it. The way they turned the sting into strength. I once had a mentor who told me, "Every no you hear is secretly pointing you toward a bigger eyes. But only if you're willing to listen." That stayed with me, because most people hear a no and shut down. They see it as a dead end. But if you soak rejection, you realize it's a compass. It's guiding you, shaping you, refining you. Rejection isn't the enemy. It's the training ground. There was a young man I knew who wanted desperately to become a musician. He poured his heart into his songs, sent demos to every label he could find, and every single one came back with the same response. Not interested. For a while he almost gave up. But then he decided to soak the rejection instead of running from it. He studied the letters, listened to the criticisms, asked himself, "What is this teaching me?" Instead of bitterness, he chose growth. He refined his craft, worked harder, and eventually began sharing his music online. Slowly people started noticing. His songs went viral. One day, the very labels that once rejected him came knocking at his door. That's the power of soaking rejection. It can turn a closed door into a doorway you never imagined. The truth is, rejection exposes our deepest fears. It whispers, "You're not enough." But soaking rejection means you respond with courage, saying, "I may not be enough yet, but I am becoming." Rejection isn't a verdict, it's feedback. It's telling you where to sharpen, where to grow, where to stretch. And if you absorb it, if you let it expand you, rejection can become the fuel that sets you on fire. I remember standing in front of an audience for the first time, eager to inspire, ready to pour my heart out. I gave everything I had. And yet after the talk, someone walked up to me and said, "Honestly, I didn't get much out of it." Their words crushed me. My instinct was to defend myself, to argue, to say they just didn't understand. But then I caught myself. What if I soaked their words instead of resisting them? What if I asked, "What can I learn?" So I did. I replayed the speech, studied my delivery, worked on my timing, sharpened my storytelling. Months later, I stood on a stage again, and this time the applause was thunderous. That moment taught me that rejection, when soaked, is not failure. It is refinement. Think of rejection like sandpaper. On the surface, it's rough, uncomfortable, even painful. But what does sandpaper do? It smooths, it polishes, it refines. Rejection, when absorbed, polishes the rough edges of your character, smooths your weaknesses, and reveals the shine that was always inside you. Without it, you remain unpolished. With it, you become extraordinary. Even in personal relationships, rejection has lessons if you choose to soak them. I once knew a woman who was devastated when a man she loved told her he wasn't ready to commit. She cried for weeks, telling herself she wasn't beautiful enough, not worthy of love. But over time, she chose to soak the experience. She realized the rejection wasn't about her lack of value. It was about the timing, about her need to love herself first. That realization expanded her, made her stronger, and eventually led her to a partner who truly saw her worth. Rejection had not destroyed her, it had prepared her. I often ask people, what if rejection isn't happening to you, but for you? What if every closed door is simply protecting you from a smaller life, making space for something greater? When you soak rejection, you begin to see it differently. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now?" That shift changes everything. I think of Michael Jordan, who was cut from his high school basketball team. He could have quit, accepted the rejection, believed he wasn't good enough. Instead, he soaked it. He let it fuel him, drive him to practice harder, push further, believe deeper. Years later, he became one of the greatest athletes the world has ever known. When asked about it, he said, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. I've failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." That is the anthem of soaking rejection. So when rejection comes, and it will, don't resist it. Don't run from it. Don't let it harden you. Instead, open yourself to it. Ask what it's teaching you. Let it refine you, expand you, push you to grow into the person you're meant to become. Because rejection is not the end of your story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter you never saw coming. And when you soak it, when you truly absorb its lessons, you discover something incredible. Rejection is not your enemy. It's your ally in disguise, shaping you into the kind of person who cannot be stopped. When I lost everything and had to start again, instead of drowning in shame, I said, "This is fuel." I soaked it. Starting over is one of the most terrifying experiences a human being can go through, because it feels like failure has burned everything you built, leaving you with ashes in your hands. It strips you of the identity you clung to, the security you thought you had, the confidence you once carried so proudly. You look around and realize that all the effort, all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights have crumbled into dust. But here's the secret I discovered. Ashes can either suffocate you, or fertilize the soil for your rebirth. It depends on whether you soak them or let them choke you. I remember walking out of my office for the last time when my first venture collapsed. The rooms that once buzzed with energy were empty, the desks cleared, the walls stripped bare. The sound of my footsteps echoed like a cruel reminder that I was leaving behind not just a job, but a dream. Friends avoided me, some whispered, others judged. Inside, shame clawed at me, telling me I was finished. For days, I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. But then one night, as I sat in silence, I whispered, What if this is not the end? What if this is the beginning? And that question cracked open the door to something new. That's when I made the choice to soak the failure, to treat it not as a grave but as fuel. Soaking loss means extracting power from pain. It's about taking the very thing that tried to break you and making it your energy source. Think about a fire. It devours wood, reduces it to ashes. But those ashes, when soaked into soil, enrich it, make it fertile, prepare it for growth. Life works the same way. The losses that burn you down can also enrich you, if you soak them. I once met a man who had declared bankruptcy after a failed business. He told me, "At first, I thought my life was over. But then I realized bankruptcy didn't kill me. It freed me. It stripped away everything false and forced me to rebuild with truth." Today, he runs a company 10 times larger than the one he lost. His secret was not avoiding loss but soaking it, turning it into fuel. He didn't drown in shame, he transformed it into determination. History is full of stories like this. Abraham Lincoln failed in business, lost elections, suffered personal tragedies, yet each time he started again, stronger. He soaked the losses until they became wisdom. Steve Jobs was fired from the very company he founded, humiliated on a global stage. But instead of letting shame bury him, he built something new, something greater, and eventually returned to Apple to lead it into one of the greatest turnarounds in history. These men weren't extraordinary because they avoided loss. They were extraordinary because they absorbed it, soaked it, and turned it into their greatest fuel. I think back to my own journey, to the nights I spent staring at ceilings, questioning my worth, wrestling with self-doubt. I could have drowned in those questions. Many people do. They let the weight of starting over crush them. They repeat the story of their loss until it becomes their identity. But I realized shame is just a story, and stories can be rewritten. I asked myself, what lesson lives inside this loss? What strength is hidden in this weakness? Slowly, I began to see that failure had taught me resilience, humility, adaptability. It had stripped away my illusions and forced me to find the core of who I was. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, they fill them with beauty. The object becomes more valuable, not less, because of its breakage. That's what soaking loss does. It fills your cracks with gold, makes you stronger, more beautiful, more unique. When I started again, I wasn't the same as before. I was cracked, yes, but I was also golden. Let me tell you about a woman I once coached. She had lost her job, her savings, and her confidence all at once. She sat in front of me with tears in her eyes and said, "I don't know how to begin again." I told her, "You don't start from zero. You start from experience." That shifted everything for her. She began to see her loss not as the end, but as fuel. She started small, selling handmade products online. At first, it was slow, but she soaked every mistake, every setback, and turned them into lessons. Years later, she runs a thriving business, and when people ask her how she did it, she smiles and says, "Losing everything gave me everything." Shame is powerful, but it's also deceptive. It tells you that you are defined by your worst moment. But when you soak shame, you realize it was never the truth. It was just a test. I once heard someone say, "Don't waste your failures. Squeeze every drop of wisdom out of them." That's what it means to use loss as fuel. It's not about denying the pain, it's about letting the pain feed your growth. Even in nature, loss is part of growth. Forest fires destroy, but they also clear the ground, release seeds, and create conditions for new life. Volcanoes erupt, covering everything in ash, but that ash becomes some of the most fertile soil on Earth. Life constantly shows us that destruction can carry creation within it. We only need to soak the lesson. So when I stood at the bottom, stripped of everything, I decided not to drown in shame. I soaked it. I let it remind me that I was still alive, still breathing, still capable of rebuilding. And with each step I took forward, I realized that the very fire that tried to consume me had actually given me new energy. My loss became my power. My shame became my strength. My restart became my revolution. And if you're listening right now, standing at the edge of your own loss, wondering if you can start again, I want you to hear this: you can. Not because it's easy, not because it won't hurt, but because inside your ashes lies fuel. If you soak it, it will carry you to heights you never imagined. Because losing everything is not the end. Sometimes, It's the beginning of becoming someone you never knew you could be. When people doubted me, when they laughed at my dreams, when I felt alone, I didn't resist it. I let it sink in. I soaked their doubt until it became my drive. Doubt is one of the heaviest weights a dreamer ever carries, heavier than failure, heavier than rejection, because it comes wrapped in familiar voices. Sometimes it's strangers who mock you, sometimes it's your friends, and sometimes it's the people you love most, the ones you expect to cheer you on. Their words can pierce deeper than any blade. That's impossible. Who do you think you are? Be realistic. Those words echo in your head until you start to wonder if they're right. But what if, instead of pushing those voices away, you soaked them? What if you allowed their doubt to become the very fuel that powers your journey? That is what I learned to do. I can still remember one night, sitting with a group of people I thought were my friends, sharing a vision that kept me awake at night. My eyes burned with excitement as I painted a picture of what I wanted to build, the kind of life I wanted to create, the dreams that kept pulling me forward. When I finished, silence filled the room, followed by laughter. Not the joyful kind, but the mocking kind, the kind that says, "You don't belong in that dream." One of them said, "Man, you're aiming way too high. Stay in your lane." Another smirked, "You'll never pull that off." Their doubt cut into me like shards of glass. For days, I replayed their words in my mind, and at first, it crushed me. But then something shifted. I thought, what if they're wrong? What if the very thing they're mocking me for is the thing that proves them wrong? At that moment, I soaked their doubt, and it became gasoline poured over the fire already burning inside me. Every great story carries doubt in its shadow. The Wright brothers were told man could never fly. Elon Musk was laughed at for dreaming of electric cars and space travel. Muhammad Ali was mocked before he was admired. Every innovator, every pioneer, every giant of history first carried the burden of being doubted. And what made them extraordinary was not the absence of doubt, but their ability to transform it into drive. I once read about a young girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor. Her teachers told her she wasn't smart enough. Her classmates teased her when she stayed up late studying. Even her family told her to settle for something easier. At one point, she almost gave up, but instead, she soaked their doubt. She turned every insult into a reminder of why she had to keep going. Years later, she walked across a stage, wearing her white coat, stethoscope in hand, her name followed by the title, Doctor. In her graduation speech, she said, "Every you can't became my reason why I had to." That's the secret of soaking doubt. It doesn't vanish, it transforms. The danger with doubt is not hearing it. The danger is believing it. If you let it root in your soul, it can strangle your dreams before they ever have a chance to grow. But if you soak it with the right mindset, doubt becomes fertilizer. It feeds your hunger to prove not just others wrong, but yourself right. I learned to look at doubt as a gift in disguise. Because if nobody doubts you, maybe your dream isn't big enough. There was a boy in my neighborhood who loved drawing. His notebooks were filled with sketches, buildings, faces, ideas. But people laughed at him. "Artists don't make money," they said. "You'll starve." He almost threw his pencils away. But one day, he decided to soak the doubt instead. He thought, if they believe I can't, then I'll show them I can. He practiced relentlessly, refined his skills, shared his work online. Years later, his art became his livelihood, his passion turned into a career, and the same people who once mocked him were now asking him to draw portraits for their families. He told me once, if they hadn't doubted me, I might never have worked so hard. Doubt is like wind. It can either blow out your flame or make it burn stronger. The choice is yours. When I felt the sting of doubt, I didn't try to block it anymore. I let it pass through me, I soaked it, and I asked myself, what if this doubt is proof that I'm on the right path? What if the resistance I'm facing means I'm building something worth building? That shift made me unstoppable. Instead of shrinking when people doubted me, I expanded. Instead of quitting, I pressed harder. I once had a mentor who said, "When people laugh at your dreams, don't get angry, get grateful. They're giving you free fuel." That stayed with me. Because every time someone said, "You can't," I quietly whispered back, "Watch me." And the more they doubted, the more fuel I had. Sometimes the doubt doesn't come from others. It comes from inside you. That inner voice that says, maybe I'm not enough. Maybe I'll fail. Maybe I'm wasting my time. That's the hardest doubt to soak because it feels like truth. But I discovered even internal doubt can be transformed. I would take those thoughts and flip them into challenges. If my mind whispered, you can't handle this, I answered, then I must. If it said, you might fail, I said, then I'll fail forward. That way, doubt stopped being a chain and became a compass. There's a line I love. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. That is the journey of every dreamer. Being doubted is not a sign of weakness. It's a stage of greatness. If you soak it, if you let it drive you, doubt becomes the proof that you are on a path worth walking. I think back now to those nights when I felt completely alone, when the laughter of others rang louder than my own belief. If I had let their voices break me, I would still be standing in the shadows of someone else's opinion. But I chose to soak it. I chose to let every smirk, every insult, every dismissal become another drop of fuel inside me. And with every step forward, I realized something profound. The doubt of others is not a reflection of your limits, it's a reflection of theirs. So when they laugh, soak it. When they dismiss you, soak it. When they tell you it's impossible, soak it. Let their doubts sink into you, not as poison, but as power. Because one day, when you rise, when you stand on the mountaintop of your success, those same voices will echo again. Only this time, they won't be laughing. They'll be applauding. And you'll know, deep in your soul, that the doubt you once carried wasn't your burden. It was your drive. There is something magical about turning pain into power. Most people run from pain, they bury it, they numb it, they try to silence it with distractions. But I learned something different. I learned to soak it. I learned to hold it close instead of pushing it away, to let it shape me instead of break me. Pain is a teacher, and if you listen carefully, it whispers the secrets of strength, resilience, and clarity. I can tell you this because I have lived it, and maybe you have too. Think back to the hardest moment of your life, the night you felt like your heart couldn't take it anymore. When your chest felt so heavy you could hardly breathe. Maybe it was the loss of someone you loved, maybe it was betrayal, maybe it was failure that cut you so deep you wondered if you would ever rise again. That pain could have ended you, but it didn't. You're here, listening to these words, which means you survived it. And if you survived it, it means there is a strength inside you that you probably haven't even fully tapped into yet. I remember nights when I cried quietly, so no one could hear me, the kind of tears that burn because they come from a wound deeper than skin. I remember staring at the ceiling, asking questions with no answers. Why me? Why now? How do I move on? At first, I thought pain was punishment, some cruel weight meant to hold me down. But over time, I realized it was chiseling me into someone stronger, like a sculptor carving stone into art. Every hit, every heartbreak, every disappointment was shaping me into a version of myself I couldn't yet see. There is a saying, the wound is where the light enters you. I didn't understand it until I lived it. Think about the people we admire most. The strongest leaders, the greatest achievers, the most inspiring souls. None of them were born in comfort. They were forged in fire. Oprah Winfrey carried the pain of poverty and abuse, but turned it into empathy and influence that touched millions. Nelson Mandela carried the pain of 27 years in prison, but he soaked it and came out with wisdom, not bitterness. Malala Yousafzai carried the pain of being shot for pursuing education, but she turned that wound into a global movement for girls' rights. Every one of them soaked their pain, instead of letting it drown them. I once met a man who lost his business, his home, and even his family in a span of 3 years. He told me there were nights he slept in his car, shivering under a thin blanket, asking himself if life was even worth living. But he said something that struck me. The moment I stopped fighting my pain and started soaking it, everything changed. My pain showed me who I really was. It stripped away the lies I believed about myself and revealed a strength I never knew I had. He went on to rebuild his life, stronger than before, and now he helps others do the same. His story reminded me that pain doesn't just take, it also gives. It gives perspective, it gives compassion, it gives resilience that no book, no lecture, no easy road could ever give. Sometimes, The most painful moments are also the ones that push us toward our purpose. A failed relationship can teach you the value of self-love. Losing a job can push you toward a calling you never would have dared pursue otherwise. Suffering rejection can build the thick skin you need for the next chapter. Pain strips you of illusions, but in doing so, it hands you truth. And truth, though hard, is always powerful. I remember a time when I hit rock bottom. Everything I worked for crumbled, and I felt betrayed by life itself. But in that dark valley, I had no choice but to sit with my pain. And as I soaked it, I started to hear its voice. It said, "You're stronger than you think. You're braver than you know. And this is not the end. It's the beginning." That's the thing about pain. It has a way of unlocking doors you didn't even know were there. It forces you to grow roots deeper than the storms. When you soak pain, it doesn't disappear, it transforms. The scar remains, but instead of being a mark of weakness, it becomes a badge of survival. Every scar tells a story, and every story can inspire someone else who is walking through fire. When you soak pain, you gain the ability to look someone else in the eyes and say, "I know what it feels like, I've been there. And if I made it through, so can you." That is priceless. I once heard a woman say, "Pain taught me to pray when nothing else could." And I understood exactly what she meant. Pain pushes you to your knees, and from that position, you discover a power greater than yourself. For some, it's faith, for others it's grit, but either way, pain opens a door to a strength that comfort never will. So many people try to numb pain with distractions, social media, substances, endless noise, because they're terrified of facing it. But the truth is, when you numb pain, you also numb growth. The very thing you're running from is the very thing that can set you free. That's why I say soak it. Let it burn, let it sting, let it carve, because every time pain cuts, it also creates space inside you for something new to grow. Think of the pearl inside the oyster. It starts with irritation, with pain, a grain of sand cutting into the soft flesh. The oyster cannot spit it out, so it covers it again and again, layer upon layer, until that painful intrusion becomes a treasure. That's what happens when you soak pain. You turn wounds into wisdom, setbacks into strength, losses into legacies. I've carried enough pain to know it doesn't vanish overnight. Sometimes it lingers for months, even years. But with every passing day, if you allow it, it can fuel you instead of freeze you. Every step you take with pain on your shoulders makes you stronger than the step before. And one day, you'll look back and realize the very thing you thought was going to destroy you was the thing that made you unbreakable. So don't run from your pain, don't curse it, don't bury it, soak it, let it teach you, mold you, sharpen you. And when life tries to knock you down again, and it will, you'll stand taller, because you've already learned the secret. Pain is not the end of your story, it's the ink that writes your comeback. So here you are, standing at the edge of a choice. You can keep running from your struggles, hiding from your scars, burying your pain in silence. Or you can soak it. You can take every wound, every doubt, every heartbreak, every failure, and turn it into fire. Because the truth is, this life isn't waiting for you to be ready, it's moving right now. And the longer you wait, the longer you delay your own rise. Soak the pain, soak the doubt, soak the fear, soak every no you've ever heard. Let it fuel you, let it mold you, let it push you to places you never thought you could reach. The people who change the world are not the ones who never suffer. They are the ones who choose to transform suffering into strength. The clock is ticking. The world is waiting, and your story, your comeback, cannot begin until you decide to own it. So rise, rise with your scars, rise with your doubts, rise with your pain, rise, not in spite of what you've been through, but because of it. And remember this: the things that tried to break you were never your ending. They were your beginning. Your pain is not your prison. Your pain is your power.